aren't you home studying? Okay, hello and welcome. It's good to have you all here. I'm Marvin Kalb, director of the Shorenstein Center on the Press, Politics, and Public Policy here at the Kennedy School. And it's my pleasure to have been asked to moderate this panel, which is being called The People versus Larry Flynt and the First Amendment. Just the combination itself of Larry Flynt at Hustler magazine and Jerry Falwell and his mother, and the First Amendment and the Supreme Court, all of this certainly guarantees an interesting and certainly a controversial discussion. It rotates around the movie recently released, in which I understand many of you saw this afternoon, called The People versus Larry Flynt, a movie that got very good, even fawning reviews, but one that has raised a number of rather profound questions about sleaze being protected by the First Amendment, about popular taste in the United States with respect to magazines and movies, and ultimately about this very special country itself. We are delighted to have the director of the movie here, Milos Forman. Two of his movies have won many Academy Awards. One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in 1975, and my absolute favorite movie, Amadeus, in 1984. And we'll see what happens with respect to the Flynt movie. Also joining us, Wendy Kaminer, a public policy fellow at Radcliffe College, journalist and author of True Love Waits, Essays and Criticisms. And Frederick Schauer, Frank Stanton Professor of the First Amendment, a constitutional scholar whose interests range across the field from Hustler magazine to Mozart. Why don't we start, in a sense, in fairness, and give the director of the movie an opportunity to explain first why he made the movie and why he did it in the way that he did it. Milos Forman.
Talk now? Let me tell you why I didn't make this movie.
What?
I didn't make this movie to glamorize pornography. I'm saying it because the film provoked controversy. But this controversy is based on a totally false premise. This film is not about pornography. It was never intended to be, neither by the writers nor by me. I was not interested to trying to find a line, dividing line between acceptable pornography and unacceptable pornography. I don't like any pornography. We were not trying to figure out whose taste should be protected by First Amendment and whose taste should be punishable by law. I really, honestly, made this film out of admiration for the unique wisdom of American Constitution, which allows that this country is rising to its best when provoked by its worst. And that's rare. That's rare. Countries as civilized and cultured as Germany, Russia, Czech Republic, Poles, when they were challenged by the Nazis or the communists, they buckled. You know, I really strongly believe if the Nazis and communists didn't succeed in muzzling the free press, that Hitler and Stalin wouldn't succeed. I really strongly believe that. And that's why I made the film. My love letter to the Supreme Court of the United States.
I asked you two questions. The
Please.
second question was, why did you make it the way you did?
Because I thought that that will be the best way to get the point across.
Okay, fine.
Well, listen,
That's
you know,
fine.
when you are making a movie, you are making the movie the way you see it. Why? Sometimes escapes me. Because sometimes you really work on your instincts, on your feelings, on what you think will work, and that's how you make the movie.
Okay,
You know.
fair enough. Wendy Kaminer.
Well, first, I'd like to thank Mr. Foreman for writing a love letter to the First Amendment. If not the Supreme Court, I'm not sure that I'd write a love letter to each and every one of the justices. There is, it's interesting, recently there's been an emerging consensus, I think, among liberal critics of the movie that it does romanticize Flint and his magazine, while at the same time people are supporting the First Amendment claims that it makes. And I saw the movie just recently, and I enjoyed it quite a lot, but I was sorry to find myself in the majority view. I hate to be in the majority. I always think if I'm in the majority, I must be wrong. I have to change my mind. But I find myself sharing that view a little bit. I think that while it was a very entertaining movie and it had an important civics lesson, that it did romanticize Flint by misrepresenting what his magazine does. And I don't think you can separate Larry Flynt from his product. Now, this is not a problem for me because it makes Larry Flynt look good. I'm not concerned with Larry Flynt. It's a problem for me because it makes the defense of the First Amendment look easy. By portraying Flint as a kind of likable, forthright rascal, squared off against the sanctimonious, hypocritical Falwell, it makes the easy case for the First Amendment. And I think in a way it's a lost opportunity to make the hard case, because it's the challenge for civil libertarians, after all, is to convince people to extend rights to the people they hate. Larry Flynt in this movie is someone we like. He calls himself a scumbag. He calls himself a pig. But he's not really portrayed as one. So that my concern is that a lot of members of the audience will root for Flynt, not because they care about or even understand the First Amendment, but because he's a much more appealing character than his persecutors. So I think, in a way, the movie mounts a less vigorous defense of the First Amendment than it might have if it had been more critical of Flynt, if it had given a fuller sense of the controversies over his magazine, and still had the audience rooting for him, and still had the audience standing up and cheering for the First Amendment rights of scumbags. I think that would have been a major accomplishment and maybe a blow against censorship. It is, I think, misleading, for example, to portray Flynt, as the movie does, as a champion of sexual liberty, an enemy of repression, because I think that Hustler is a tribute to sexual hang-ups. In the pages of Hustler magazine, sex is violent. Sex can be abhorrent in a way. Women are contemptible. And I think the irony is that there's a way in which Hustler magazine and Falwell's Moral Majority had a lot in common. They both represented a lot of social and sexual regressiveness. I think Flynt and Falwell have something in common, aside from the fact that they're both self-made men, and I think that probably is really a bond for them in a way. But it's not hard for me to imagine some uptight fundamentalist who feels guilty about sex reading Hustler magazine in his darker moments. It would, I think, confirm his darker notions of human sexuality. So while Larry Flynt in the movie is on the right side of a legal debate, and Falwell is on the wrong side, they're both on the same side, and in my view, the wrong side of a larger cultural battle for social equality, for sexual equality. And that cultural battle, it seems to me, is an important part of the context for Flynt's story. We all know that protests of pornography have come from feminists as well as people on the right, and that those protests have helped shape a campaign against hate speech. It's helped shape an assault on the First Amendment from the left in this country, which I think has done some real damage to free speech on campus. Now, I think it would be really unfair to ask a movie to address those issues, to address the larger question of speech and equality, but I wish there had been some attempt to at least acknowledge the feminist campaign against pornography, because it is easy to convince people that a magazine should have the right to run parodies of a public figure. It is much harder to convince them that images of rape and dismembered women are protected speech. Those images don't seem to have much social value. In fact, I don't think Hustler does have any particular social value, but I also don't think that's relevant. I don't imagine that everything I say has a lot of social value either. But that doesn't mean I should be censored, no matter how irritating people consider me. Speech doesn't have to justify itself. So I guess my quarrel with the movie is that the job for a civil libertarian is to show people that speech that doesn't have social value, speech that may even represent social harm, should be protected. And I think there's a way in which the movie shrinks from that job, so that to the extent that it does romanticize Flint, there's a way that it lacks the courage of its convictions.
Thank you, Wendy. Fred
With all due
Schauer?
respect.
Fred?
And perhaps my role here is just to provide a little background, legal doctrine, a little background information. I do find myself in substantial agreement with virtually all of what Wendy just said. Let me add a little bit.
I'm really going to have to change my
Let me add a little bit of context or legal doctrine to that. It is undeniably true that the American free speech tradition is different in a more libertarian way than the tradition of any place else on the face of the earth, and that's a good thing. If we are looking for the one person who litigated the one case that has made the American tradition more distinct than, or as distinct as it is, we would look to another resident of Southern Ohio, a man named Clarence Brandenburg. Clarence Brandenburg was the leader of the Ohio branch of the Ku Klux Klan. There is no way anyone could do a movie that would glorify or dress up Clarence Brandenburg. Clarence Brandenburg gave a speech in the late 1960s in which he urged, forgive me, but I must use his words, in which he urged that the niggers be sent back to Africa and the Jews be sent to Israel. He was prosecuted for sedition and inciting to violence. The case got to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court unanimously upheld Clarence Brandenburg's First Amendment rights, and it is Brandenburg's case, Brandenburg's case defending the right to incite to political and racial violence, which Brandenburg did as part of his speech, that may be perhaps the most significant feature of the American First Amendment tradition. And Brandenburg, unlike the character portrayed in this movie, and I distinguish the character portrayed in this movie from the human being who is Larry Flynt, Brandenburg, unlike the character portrayed in this movie, is a true scumbag. We might also think, as we are thinking about the American tradition, 8 years later, Skokie, Illinois. The case did not reach the Supreme Court of the United States, but a man named Frank Collin, the leader of the American Nazi Party, famously, notoriously, and successfully litigated his right to have a Nazi march in Skokie, Illinois. By the time we got to 1978, when these cases were decided, Frank Collins' case was so easy that the Supreme Court didn't even think it had to hear it. It is an important and central feature of the American First Amendment tradition, as Wendy says, that some genuinely awful people have been right at the center of it. One of those genuinely awful people is, in fact, Larry Flynt, but one doesn't see Larry Flynt's genuine awfulness in the portrayal of this movie. There are important ways in which Flynt, Brandenburg, and Cullen are of a piece. Not in the Flynt that we see in the movie, but in the Flynt of sexualized racism, a recurring theme of this publication, the Flynt of Chester the Molester, a frequent participant or character in Hustler magazine, the Flynt of repeated sexual violence, very different from sexual explicitness, which is a central theme here. Now, indeed, in a rather odd irony, if we were to look for the people that have been central in forming the American First Amendment tradition, and we wanted to look earlier than Brandenburg and earlier than Cullen, we would look to the 1920s, the 1930s, and the 1940s, and we would find the Jehovah's Witnesses. That if there are the people who have created in the United States the tradition that you can intentionally insult people and be protected by the First Amendment, it is Jehovah's Witnesses named Chaplinsky and the like who have been at the center of creating that tradition. Now, just a very brief word about the law on the two quite different issues that are dealt with in the movie. And one of the important things about the movie is that it appropriately deals with two quite different First Amendment issues. One is the question of obscenity law. In the United States and most other Western democracies, obscenity law is technically, constitutionally a permissible thing for the state to do, but as a practical and political matter, largely a dead letter. There are not very many obscenity prosecutions. One of the important and correct things about the movie is that Cincinnati is a very big exception to what I have just said. The political viability and political importance of obscenity prosecution in the United States is one thing in the rest of the country, quite something else in Cincinnati. The fact that the conviction was overturned, even in Cincinnati, reflects American law. The category of legal obscenity is a very, 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 very tiny, and even within that tiny category, spectacularly under-enforced, although still on the books, crime. That Hustler magazine in the 1990s does not worry and need not worry about the American obscenity laws. The other feature of the movie is Falwell versus Hustler. The important feature here is that the decision was 9-0. Sometimes the Supreme Court decides 9-0 the first time it ever gets an issue. But usually when you see a 9-0 decision, you can pretty much guess that this is old hat and settled doctrine by the time we get around to it. One more hero. Back in 1969, a gentleman named Robert Paul Cohen objected to the policies of the Selective Service System of the United States, objected to the policies of General Louis Hershey, and objected to the policies of the United States in the war in Vietnam. He decided to display those objections to anybody who wanted and even didn't want to see his objections, but he couldn't fit all the words that I have just said on the back of a jacket, so he wore a jacket that contained only 3 words: fuck the draft. Robert Paul Cohen won his case in the Supreme Court of the United States. His case, more than anything, made Skokie easy, and his case combined with Skokie made it a very easy decision by the time we get to Falwell versus Hustler. That, of course, you can offend, insult, hurt with intention to do so passers-by, public officials, important people, and various other stuffed and not so stuffed shirts, and be fully protected by the First Amendment. Yes, it was clearly the right decision, I know of no specialist who would have guessed otherwise prior to the decision. It's a useful and there might be an adverb that goes with that word. I can't say it. It is a useful and important event to note this in a motion picture. Let's be careful that we not understate the principle that was at issue, but let's be equally careful to make sure that we don't make Larry Flynt out as the creator of the principle or someone who was at any time in any serious jeopardy because of it. I'll stop at that.
No, thank you very much.
Why do
Fred.
you think film is doing that?
Oh, no, I don't think film is doing it. I think this film is marking Falwell versus Hustler as an appropriate example of a tradition that goes back at least as far as 1969 and probably goes back as far as the Jehovah's Witnesses in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and the 50s. My slight quarrel on this point is not that he won, not that this film appropriately recognized that he did win and should have won, but that it might have made him out slightly more than appropriately justified as the person who created the principle and as the person who was in serious risk of losing. That neither of those was true.
Does anybody feels that that's the case? Larry Flynt even didn't argue. He didn't win the case. It was his lawyer who argued, and it was the Supreme Court who won the case. You know, this is why it's for me very difficult to, and I feel very now silly that I feel like I have to defend this little film, you know, because you are not talking about my film. You neither are talking about my film. You are talking that we are romanticizing. I was very careful, and you tell me one example, but concrete example, line or image from the film, which is glamorizing or romanticizing Larry Flynt.
Okay, I'll give you one example, but before I do, let me say that as a writer, I really do sympathize with your complaint that we are talking about the film that you didn't make, because I get very irritated when critics complain about the book that I didn't write. And we are not reviewing your film. I can only speak for myself. I liked your film a lot. And I see myself here as not so much talking about your film as talking about some of the issues that it raises for us and some of the First Amendment issues. But if you want me to give you an example of a part of the film that I think glamorized what he did in a way, it was the sequence where when he had just come out of jail and he was celebrating his release, and he was standing before a large screen with images of war and saying, "You tell me what is more obscene, these images of war or these images of naked women?"
They answered.
Now, well, let me
Let her
finish.
finish.
Let me finish.
Let her finish.
And given the images of nudity that were shown, the answer was easy. Of course, these images of war are more obscene. If the meat grinder cover had been up there, if some of the more vicious pictorials, the more violent pictorials from Hustler magazine had been up there, I think it would have been a harder question. Which is more obscene, these images of war or these images of rape and sexual mutilation? Now, I know there's an extremely important difference. The images of war were real. The images of rape and mutilation were metaphoric, and I don't want to gloss over that difference. But I think there was a way in which that sequence made Hustler seem like Playboy, and it is not like Playboy. It is a very different kind of animal.
First of all, if you remember well, that scene is introduced by a dialogue when his brother says, "Isn't it wonderful that Americans for free press are inviting us here?" And Larry says, "You idiot. Americans for free press, it's me. Who do you think is paying for this?" And then you see, that's a demagogue. That's a demagogue that he is saying something which makes sense. What is more obscene? And he is saying something, you never mentioned that, what he's saying. Murder is illegal, but you photograph somebody committing an act of murder, and it will be on the cover. Sex is legal. You photograph a naked woman, you go to jail. It makes sense for a common man, you know? But that's his demagoguery, how he is doing. Look, I'll tell you something, and why we didn't show these images. I was very careful to illustrate, not only in dialogue, there's a lot of things in dialogue. His wife is telling him, this is making people sick. They are vomiting, they are puking. You are the worst, you are the smut. His lawyer is telling him, you are a pig. You know, the lawyers, Gratman is telling him things which are absolutely correct. But even pictorially, his tastelessness. We show the cartoon. What is more, that's the bottom of the tastelessness. Dorothy from Wizard of Oz and Tin Man.
Oh, that's not
No,
vulgar.
Vulgarity, wait,
That's
let me
at the very
finish.
top.
Vulgarity. What is more vulgar than this tasteless joke about Santa Claus? And now you are talking, about, why didn't you show the violence, the brutality? Well, it's there, right there, naked woman body going through the meat grinder. I think that these three examples tell you exactly that I don't consider Hustler magazine a tasteful magazine. Wait. That it is a very, that's clear, right? What do you want, more? 2 more? 17 more? What would satisfy you? And answer me one thing. A lot of adversaries of this film go on television to get across the point that I am a dishonest coward because I am not showing images. Why they don't show the images? Why they don't show on television, look, he should have shown this, and this, and this, and this. You see, he hid it. I'll tell you why they don't show it. For the same reason as I don't show them, because they would never be on the air, and this film would never be made.
That's a very
I
important.
understand that.
That's a very important point. That is, it's clear that you're right about that, but it turns out, therefore, that the central part of the tradition that Wendy so eloquently explained is something that people are not going to find out about because neither Hollywood, nor CBS, nor the New York Times is going to show the full Chester the Molester cartoons, is going to show sexualized African-American welfare mothers in Hustler magazine and the like. Part of the problem is not, glorified might not be the right word. It is glorified vis-a-vis the actual person, not glorified in some objective sense. And at least for me, the important difference between the adversaries in this film, and there are many, and Flint properly wins against the adversaries in this film, is that all of the adversaries in this film are the powerful. But the people who in the actual magazine are so, the children in Chester the Molester, the sexualized racism and the like, it is the powerless who are the targets of the sexualization. That didn't come through to me from the movie.
Can I say something briefly?
I haven't said a word. Go ahead.
You said that when referring to the scene when Flint is up there with his movie screen and talking about what's obscene, that he was supposed to look like a demagogue in that scene. And I think the problem that I'm trying to get at is that Woody Harrelson is so likable, and the character he portrays is so likable, that he doesn't ever come across as a demagogue. No, let me finish. When you do show the meat grinder cover, and it is something people have a visceral reaction to, but what is his reaction to it? What is his explanation for it? He seems sincerely wounded that people are offended by this, and he's in the middle of his conversion experience, and he explains that this cover is meant to show that from now on, he's going to treat women with respect. Well, I find that a little hard to believe.
Me too.
Right, but it's not, but it doesn't come across in the
Makes
movie.
sense.
But it doesn't come across in the movie. Maybe it's because Harrelson is so
listen.
likable as something that is that hard to believe. Maybe he should have been played by Jack Nicholson. I
I'm
don't know.
sorry, I am not a sociologue. I'm a filmmaker, and I'm telling you, demagogues are the most dangerous demagogues
Are the
are
likable
very
ones?
charming, very charming. Otherwise, why would so many people, lap it up what they are doing? And listen, let me tell you
Did
one
you
thing.
try to make him charming?
Is it what?
Did you try to make him charming?
No. You know, I'll tell you, how can you make Larry Flint such a charming rogue? Because he is a rogue and he is charming. That's the ambiguity of this person. That's what's fascinating for me. I don't care. I stated clearly, this man is tasteless, vulgar, brutal, in spite of his charm. And what fascinates me is the ambiguity. Who is he? Who is that man? Is he a really conscious fighter for our freedoms, or he is a smart peddler who is trying to use the First Amendment to sell more dirty magazines? Or is it possible that he's both?
Or is he both?
Or if he is both, which one is he more? Oskar Schindler, was he a savior of human lives, or was he just a Nazi who used slave labor and to enrich himself and become rich? Or was he both? I don't. That's what fascinates me. That's why, you know, if I took as a hero to test the First Amendment somebody who says few profane words, I don't think none of you would be here. You would be bored to death, you know. But this kind of extreme characters, with this kind of contradictions and ambiguities, is fascinating. And, you know, but I can't help it when you show the person about whom you thought that it's 100% black devil, and you add some less black sides to him, why do you call it romanticizing? Let me ask you a question. Would you say that film Godfather, romanticized gangsters who are not only,
Probably,
not
yeah.
printing, you know, they're killing?
Yeah, I would say
Would
that
you
it
say
did.
that Monsieur Verdoux is romanticizing mass murder?
Haven't seen it.
Anybody saw that? Would you say that Romeo and Juliet is romanticizing teenage suicide? Is that the reason why this film should not be made, or the Hollywood studio should be discouraged to make this kind
Oh,
of film?
nobody is suggesting that it
Oh,
should
yes,
not have
yes,
been
you
made.
do.
Well,
No,
we are not
Yes, you do.
suggesting it.
That
We
you
are not
stated it.
suggesting it.
Yes, you do.
Who stated that?
I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. Because I didn't want to bring this up, but I lived long enough in the countries, in the societies, in two different societies, where censorship was rampant, right? Let me tell you, you are not calling for censorship. You are calling for something worse. You are calling for self-censorship, and that's very, very bad. Because this message which is sent to Hollywood and to every filmmaker is, oh, listen, you know, unless if there is more than car chases, forget about this. It will be attacked. It will not make money. We will lose money. We will lose our jobs. Forget it. And you start to speculate what would not be attacked, what would be permissible, where I would go easy. And you start to be honest. You start to be somebody whom you are not. And that's...
Mr. Foreman, nobody
You know.
is suggesting that this film should not have been made. I'm suggesting, I think, something a little different. I'm suggesting that I think it would have made a stronger case for the First Amendment if, in a way, there had been less censorship of the kind of magazine that Hustler is. I think it is important to make a movie like this that shows an ambiguous and maybe even demagogic figure who produces material that a lot of people in society find more than offensive, and to show that's protected, and that his fight in the courts is an important one, and that his rights are coextensive with our rights. I think that is a very important project to undertake, and I'm glad that you made the film. And I'm
No,
simply
you're not.
no, I am. I think you're
No, you are
misunderstanding
not.
me. I think that
I didn't make the film
misunderstanding me.
dirty enough for you.
Right. I want it to be worse than it is.
No?
Because I think it
But
would have
look,
been
listen to me one thing. I'll tell you. First of all, I doubt that the film would be made. The film
Well,
would
that's
not be made.
probably true.
You know. But
That's
let's
probably
say that I'm totally crazy. You know, executive in Hollywood would make that film, and I really could put on the screen. I could splash the screen with images that you all would be throwing eggs and yelling and screaming. You know what would the result be? The reaction? That the Supreme Court is a bunch of closet perverts, and we have to throw them out, and our founding fathers were naive people who didn't know anything about life, how they could put First Amendment to protect this.
Well, then the First Amendment is not as strong as you think it is, if that's what you think would happen. And you may be right about that, and that is a sad commentary.
Well, I'll tell you. It's not as simple as you are telling.
When you make a movie, do you make a movie to portray history as close to reality as possible?
Look, when you are making a historical documentary or historical biography, you have to be very faithful to the facts. But when you are making a drama, all you have to do is to be faithful to the spirit of the facts.
You know, you're using names of real people. You're using real circumstance, real history. Why don't you, just following that bit of logic, why don't you stay closer to history?
Because the film would be between 14 and 18 hours long.
You can cut. I've done documentaries that come in 52 minutes.
I know. I cut also what I didn't consider that it's pushing my point forward and across. I cut it out from the story. That's you know.
No, but I'm trying to understand, because we have the producer of this movie is somebody who also gave us JFK, which is a dramatic movie, but a total distortion of what happened. And he was here at the Kennedy School about 5 years ago and presented his case. The students who saw the movie seemed to agree with his version of what indeed had happened in 1963. It's simply not true. And what I'm trying to get at is when you do movies like this, are you aware of the responsibility that you have toward society, toward people who may not know as much about history as you do, lived as long as you do? What is your sense of that?
First of all, everything what the characters who are alive and you know, the lawyers and the courtrooms, that's all verbatim. Everything was said, was taken from the transcript, maybe from different speeches, you know, but that's what I'm talking about. That's all. There is nothing there which would not be faithful to the spirit of the facts and of these people regarding what the film is about. That's
But if
all
you
I can
wanted
tell
to
you.
do something that was simply faithful to spirit, you don't have to use real names, real events, and suggest that you are doing something that is historical in nature.
But if we are using the transcripts and we are using only the words which these characters said, why don't use the real characters?
I know, but this is,
The real names?
this is characteristic of a great deal of modern fiction, which uses non-fictional names, non-fictional circumstance constantly.
Are you,
Hollywood and this kind of fiction go hand in hand.
I think I would be accused even more of dishonesty. Do you think that the people would not know who we are talking about?
I would suspect they would
would.
not know unless you told them.
That's part of the problem. I think that one of the things that may distinguish this from your examples of The Godfather and the like is that in some of those examples, there's a reasonably good background, historical, factual understanding about what were the facts of the case. I think one of the, it's not what went in, it's what didn't go in. And I think that insofar as there is a large-scale non-understanding of what actually is out there that didn't go in, there is a serious risk of distorting the historical record, distorting how people understand the event, and indeed understanding the First Amendment. But that's not the issue at the moment. It's just misunderstanding the event.
But I don't agree, you know, if Mr. Falwell's name in the film would be Mr. Johnson, I'm sure that film critics and journalists would take care that everybody knows who Mr. Johnson is, you know.
Okay,
That's not
we have
me.
an opportunity for you to ask questions now. There are 2 microphones down here. There are 2 in the balcony that I see. And we'll start here on the left and go around in this way. And please, just a question, no speeches. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Darren Stefanov. I'm a junior at the college. I'm from Bulgaria. And I just wanted to clear on something. It seems like, unfortunately, none of the speakers so far seem to talk about the movie itself. They talk about the character, Larry Flynt, the person, Larry Flynt. Now, nobody seems to touch on the issue of the problem itself here on civil liberties and on whether one should be allowed to do something like that, to present it to the public and to sell the Hustler magazine. Now, I just wanted to ask Mr. Foreman whether I got the idea of his film right, because from what I heard so far on behalf of the other speakers, I mean, I think that they got it wrong. But did you, in this movie, try to present the issue? I mean, it doesn't matter how dirty Larry Flynt is, because he is dirty, but nobody's 100% clean of that. It doesn't matter. Do you just focus on the issue?
To a lot of people. But go ahead.
Okay, was just the issue that interested you most, and you presented the complexity of the character, but was the issue itself that was puzzling and ambiguous and interesting? Because after all, I mean, art is not reality. You can reproduce reality and show how disgusting it is.
Please ask your question.
Okay, so my question is, what was in the center of this movie? I think it's about
What
the
is the
issue.
central point of the movie?
Central
that
point of the
Mr.
movie. It's not Larry Flynt at all.
Okay.
And everybody seems to
let's
talk
get the
only
answer
about
first.
Larry Flynt so far. So that was really.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Foreman, what was the central
Well,
point?
very briefly, because I think we talked about this. It is the fascination for me how a very unlikely man can become fascinating for me, because he is enhancing some very vital for me and for the whole society. For the reasons, I don't know the reasons for which he's doing it. I am, making inquisition into it, and it's still ambiguous still today for me, and I think it's still ambiguous to him, and that's why it's intriguing.
Did you get to know him reasonably well as you did the movie?
I would say reasonably well, yes.
How long a period of time did you spend with him?
Well, I met him about 2-3 times before we started shooting, and I must tell you he impressed me already then in a certain way. Because
was he with you throughout the shooting? of the
no,
movie?
he was there only when he was doing his part. He's playing a judge, Morrissey, in the film. That's Larry Flynt. So only then he was there. Otherwise, no. He didn't have any right to, influence the script or film at all. And
Did he read it in advance?
What?
He
Yes,
read it in advance?
yes. I wanted him to read the script because I was just curious, and I was very surprised because he was very meticulous, and all he was talking about was factual things, like dates and names and things.
You
things
regard
like
him
that.
as a very intelligent man?
And I would regard him. Yes, I would regard him intelligent. Yes. No, but let me tell you one thing, which is important, which impressed me. Already in the scripts were things which are very, very unflattering to him, and I was expecting him, to hear from him, I don't want you to show this in the film, and he never said that. I got very curious, and I asked him. I said, Larry, you don't mind this to be in the film? And he looked at me and said, of course I do mind, but it's true. So what can I say?
Do you think of him as a journalist of some sort?
What?
Do you think of Larry Flynt as a journalist of some sort?
I think he's a chameleon which has many, many colors, and some of these colors are very admirable, some are very ugly, some are very intriguing. He's a character only in America.
That's probably true. Yes, ma'am, your
Hi,
question.
my name's Alexandra Samuel. I'm a PhD student in government here. I have to admit I've been sympathetic to most of what's been said so far, but it does seem to me that you've all been speaking at cross purposes, and I wonder if the problem isn't that rather than speaking about the First Amendment, you should be speaking about the relationship between politics and art. And in particularly in light of what you said about your criticisms of being some sort of call for self-censorship, I wonder whether you might comment on how one can engage with the political content of art while still making room for art, and what your role is as an artist in commenting on political issues, and whether it is even appropriate to engage with art as a form of political speech.
Well, there is no more important political issue than to protect in every way we can the freedom of the press, because that's the cornerstone of democracy, more than anything else.
Do a piece on Peter Zenger. Why Larry Flynt?
Well, who wants to watch a movie about Peter Zenger?
Because it's great history. I mean, I'm serious about that.
No, but I am serious when I am saying, I am a filmmaker. I am not averse to entertainment.
Why does entertainment have to, I'm following up on your point. Why does entertainment have to be translated into Larry Flynt when it could be translated into a far more appealing character who has literally done much more for American journalism than Larry Flynt?
Talk to the studios, you'll find out. Try to sell this.
In other words, this gets to your point, in other words, the studios will only take this kind of movie, this kind of orientation, will only take the exploitation of an individual such as Larry
I'll tell
Flynt?
you, if I'll go to the studio and I'll tell them, listen, I will make a very important political film, which will be very boring, I will not...
Arthur Miller just did Crucible once again. That was not a boring film, and it was about a very important subject.
Mark,
Oh,
can I
yes?
interrupt for a minute? I don't think that a movie has to justify itself by being about an appealing, likable character. I think that
Yeah, but
Larry
there's nothing
Flynt-
wrong with it either.
No, but there's also nothing wrong with taking a complicated and very flawed character and making him the subject of a movie, and that's very interesting. And it's interesting to me because as I hear you describe Larry Flynt, I share in some ways that assessment of him, and that's not the portrait of him that came across to me in the movie, and maybe that's the disagreement that we have. But if I can say something quickly about this question about politics and art, I've been asking myself a lot of questions about, is a movie like this required to stick to the facts, as you suggested before? I'm not sure that it is. It is entertainment, it's drama, it's a movie. And it seems to me that it shouldn't be judged by its political content. There are ways in which this dispute about this movie reminded me...
Mr. Foreman's justification was political content.
Yes,
It was a love letter to the First Amendment.
Yes, but I don't think that it should, for example, so there are some feminists who've said that this movie should not be considered for an Oscar because it romanticizes Larry Flynt. I think that's nonsense. I think in a way that's like saying that Elia Kazan shouldn't be honored by the American Film Institute because he named names. That's just another form of blacklisting. And I don't think that movies should be blacklisted because of their political content.
Good. Excellent. Question in the balcony.
Hi,
Please.
my name is Sarah Hurwitz, and I'm a sophomore at the undergraduate school here. I actually have a very specific question for Mr. Foreman about the character of Larry Flynt. Someone pointed out to me when I was watching the movie that there is in one scene a judge who is somewhat overweight, pretty unattractive, not a particularly appealing character, and pointed out to me that that was the real Larry Flynt who was playing that character. But the man who plays Larry Flynt in the movie is actually a very handsome, very appealing character. And I was wondering why the particular discrepancy existed and if that was deliberate or if you could talk about that.
Well, first of all, I don't know how Woody Harrelson will look 20 years from now, And I'll tell you, when you see pictures, photographs of Larry Flynt at the time when he was 30, he was a rather attractive young man,
Okay. Yes, please, in the balcony.
Hi, Mr. Foreman. My name is Chris Brown. I'm an MPA student here at the Kennedy School. I wanted to ask you a question regarding your letter to the New York Times that was published last month in which you called the hero of The People versus Larry Flynt. You said the Supreme Court was the hero of the film. And in the film, in the climax of the film, Mr. Flynt is very deferential to the court. I guess what was missing was apparently that Flynt had actually appeared before the Supreme Court 3 years before, and in another case that was not seen in the film, and was dragged out of the court by the police after he screamed obscenities at the court. I mean, I guess my question is, why leave a crucial scene like that out, where where Flynt is screaming at the heroes of the film? Why does that not appear in the movie? I hate to be another person asking what's not in the film, but it seems like it would be a critical point in the movie if you're really going to say the hero of the movie is the court.
We were talking a lot about if we should include this scene or not, and we even tried, but the fact is that it totally undermined the dramatic effect of the final scene. And you have the first time, if you would have this scene of the Supreme Court there, its majesty of the Supreme Court and the justices and everything, and you make it into this kind of a scene, and then you come and you need really to make an impact that the Supreme Court will really be impressive, and this is the climax of the film. That would be undermined by having it twice in a row,
Mr. Foreman, it's your next turn, but I just want to get in a question here. For those of us who don't make movies every day, could you explain to us, since there are two big names here, the producer Oliver Stone, director Milos Forman, who gets the idea first? Who
Writers.
comes to whom?
Writers. Writers, that's the bread and butter of every movie. It has to be written, the story. Then somebody has to find money to make the movie.
But is it the producer or the director?
That's the producer who, when the producer comes in, you know.
So in this case, Oliver Stone gets a script produced by some writer.
Oliver Stone gets a script, reads the script, says, I don't want to direct it myself, but I want to produce it. I will find money, and I will take care that the script will be offered to a director of my choice, which should suit this kind of a subject. Then he sent me the script, I read the script, I say, I am interested in, and then he goes and tells me if he found money or not. And then I sit down with the writers, and then we worked out the shooting script, the final version of the script, which then is filmed, and you can see it on the screen.
Between the time that the writers write the script to the time that it appears on screens, how much time elapses?
It depends. Sometimes 10 years, sometimes 1 year.
In this case?
In this case, I think the writers pitched the script for the first time about 3.5 years ago, and the script got to me about 2 years ago.
How much money did it take to make it?
It was, it might sound a lot, but it's below the today's average in Hollywood, $34 million.
Sounds like a piece of cake, then. Your question, please.
My name is Robin Hoekman. I'm a visiting fellow with a business school writing a thesis on the European motion picture industry. You've stated in the beginning that you did not make the movie because it was pornography. On the other hand, you stated, well, the movie was realized because it was attached to the topic of pornography because that sells well. What do you think, how far as an artist would you go to adjust your content of the movie to the marketing executives in Hollywood?
Well, look, if the film was just a life story of Larry Flint or about pornography, I certainly wouldn't make the film. If the film was not what it is for me, very passionate testimony about the importance of the First Amendment, I wouldn't make the film. But this combination was very exciting, not because of pornography, but because of personality of Larry Flint. Because this man is so extreme, full of so many contradictions and ambiguities. And because then the test of First Amendment is strong. Rather if it was somebody, innocuous.
You would agree that the movie probably wouldn't have been realized by a studio if it was not about pornography, because no one would have watched it.
Well, I'll tell you, till today I am impressed that the studio made the film.
The question actually raises something very important. I mean, the film is perfectly appropriate in focusing on the potentially restrictive forces of governments in the first part of the movie, the potentially restrictive forces of private litigation in the second part of the movie. The question raises the very important question about, in 1997 America, what is it that might be keeping us from seeing, hearing, or saying what some or many people might otherwise want to see, hear, or say? To some extent, we shouldn't forget about governments. To some extent, we shouldn't forget about private litigation. But as we enter into an era of commercialization of the mass media, media integration, and the like, there's a very serious question that ought to be addressed that's been lurking around our discussion. And it's been, you've said it a number of times appropriately, that what Hollywood will fund and what it will not fund, what Walmart will sell and what it will not sell, what MTV will show and not show, what cable operators will buy and not buy, what advertisers will advertise and not advertise, may be a much, much more important topic than what the government can do. That's not to say the government is unimportant, but if we're looking around in 1997 about where are the forces of speech limitation, they're much more likely to be located in, broadly speaking, the private sector, whether that be the business part of the private sector or just the norms of communication and the like, than in the government. It's oversimplified to say in the US we've won that battle, but it's not completely false.
We have hardly started that battle.
Very good point. Yes, please, your question.
Hi, I'm Frances Gladstone. I'm a writer and a university teacher. I have a lot of respect for your background. My mother also was a German Jewish refugee. I only mention that because I live here now. I've been in Europe and come back. What it seems to me that everyone here is talking about, without pinpointing it, is a conflict of values and the idea of freedom of expression. In Europe, there isn't freedom of expression. Here, as a reaction, there is total freedom of expression, but freedom of expression was meant to include certain values. Freedom of expression nominally is vacuous, it's empty. Unless it includes certain values of sensitivity, limited aggression. Do I make myself clear? It seems to me that the notion of freedom of expression is empty unless it's defined. In Europe, it didn't exist. It was defined by barbarism and torture and everything else. Here, we've gone the other way, and freedom of expression does not mean sensitivity, a limit to aggression. There are other values which I think must be included or redefined in the idea of value structure in freedom of expression.
Do you feel, Mr. Foreman, that?
Well, you know, I think this is a very, very good question, because that makes you think that really the nitty-gritty is what kind of value we put on freedom, how much we are willing to pay for it. We are taking freedom for granted here, something we get for free, no obligation. You don't have to pay for it. That's not true. Freedom sometimes is very expensive. My experience is that every totalitarian regime I know from my life experience started with opening the door for the censorship just a crack to get rid of the smut, to get rid of the perverts. The Nazis did that, the communists did that, to get rid of pornography, prostitutes, homosexuals. Before you realize suddenly that when you open the door to censorship a little bit, it never stays just a little bit open. And after a while, suddenly, the Jews were added, blacks were added, Slavs were added, communists added, Christians, Muslims, gypsies, you know, and it never stops. Freedom is gone. To regain this freedom, these countries paid with tens of millions of human lives to regain this freedom. And we don't even want to pay with a hustler for our freedom?
But we do.
We do. We do every day. We do every
Well,
We do. But I think if I understand the question, then I couldn't disagree with the premise of it more. If you're suggesting that freedom of expression has to in some way justify itself by its values, I think freedom of expression is an end in itself, and that it is not measured by notions of sensitivity or social value or anything else, that it is a good in itself, and that people have a kind of moral right to express themselves in whatever ways they choose, regardless of how hateful or offensive the rest of us find it.
Good. Question, Zach, go.
I'm Zachary Carabell of the Kennedy School. I have a short question for Mr. Foreman and a short question for the panel. If accepting a little bit of censorship opens the door to a lot of censorship, I'd like you to talk a little more about Fred Schauer's point about Hollywood censorship and your own willingness to accept the limitations that market and that system places on your ability, willingly or not, to express what you wish to express in a movie. The other question is for the panel. Is it better that a flawed film about Larry Flynt and the First Amendment get made than no film about Larry Flynt or the First Amendment get made?
Mr. Foreman, why don't you go first?
I didn't understand exactly the question.
Zach, you want to do it again? The first.
What did you ask me?
If you open the, you just said before that if you open the door
little.
to censorship a little bit,
Yes.
you open the door to censorship in toto. And I wanted, about Fred Shower's point, that Hollywood and corporate censorship of freedom of expression is a serious problem akin to government. What are the problems of an artist or of you in making this film of accepting the limitations on your ability to express images or ideas in a movie?
Well, look, nothing is 100% either or, you know. In totalitarian regimes, there is no commercial censorship or pressure at all. It's ideological pressure and ideological censorship. In the free world, there is practically no ideological pressure or censorship, but there is a commercial censorship. But now, what is more acceptable for me? Definitely the commercial censorship, because that's dictated by the taste of the audience, of many, many, many people. But ideological censorship is always dictated by one person or one group with a very narrow agenda. So that's the basic difference, if I understand your question.
No, excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Fred, you want to take on that second question, either no movie or a flawed movie?
Flawed is better than none, and I think, but that's an oversimplified statement. There is a sense in which, at times, things that are flawed create misimpressions, and misimpressions may be worse than no impressions. I think part of what I was trying to say, and if I understand the right, Wendy was trying to say as well, is only that maybe what we're doing and maybe some of what the public discussion is doing is in a very odd way trying to make it a better movie. That this becomes a better movie if people understand just what Larry Flynt is. And the movie didn't do that job very well, but if the surrounding discourse fills in that, then the movie becomes a better movie.
I don't think there's any such thing as a flawless movie, and I think, of course, a flawed movie about Larry Flynt is better than a flawless one, if there were such a thing. And I'm glad that there's been a movie made about him, and I think part of the value of it is the discussion we're having tonight.
Amadeus was almost flawless. Yes, please.
Okay, hello. My name is Troy Lee, and I'm a junior at the college. I have a question for the director that has to deal with the film more than about the political issues that surround it. One of the big themes, or one of the big ideas that I got from the film, it comes out in the title, The People versus Larry Flynt, seems to suggest that it's we the people who are going against this guy, who are persecuting him, who are doing all these horrible things to him. And then it seems that one of the most horrible things you could do, which is try to assassinate him, when that occurs, the character who assassinates him actually appears earlier in the film as just a lonely wandering man who goes nearby his strip shop, and who goes, and we see him I think twice before we actually see him in the execution scene. I'm curious, because he was anonymous and he's never been caught, why did you actually choose to personify him in a particular character and present him the way you did?
Because just to remind myself and the audience that these people can be sitting in this room. These people exist. That only because he was not caught, nobody knows who he is, doesn't mean that that man disappeared from the planet. No, he's a real person who is, who can be dressed once as a carpenter, the next time as a lawyer, and he could be sitting here.
Okay. Your question, please.
Hello, my name is David Abrams. I'm a junior at the college, and I'd just like to make a small point responding to something Professor Kalb said as an intro to my question. You said about students being misled by JFK several years ago into thinking that it was historical fact. And, well, on behalf of myself, I would say I was not misled by JFK into thinking it was history.
You were here in the audience?
No.
Were you here in the audience?
I thought you were just responding to the movie.
No, I'm talking about what happened in this room 5 years ago.
I thought you were talking about the movie.
And I am saying that the movie was flawed and presented a bad view of history. Yeah, I am.
Okay, well, let me get to my question.
Why don't you do that?
Okay. And I was not, well, let me say this. My first reaction to Larry Flynt was how much of it is exactly what is true. Now my question is, how much responsibility is there in artists and scientists and anyone that influences the public to protect the public against itself? How much do they need to do that? Or should artists and scientists be free to create whatever they can to pursue truth to whatever extent they can?
To whom are you directing the question?
Everyone. Anyone who wants to respond.
Okay. Mr. Foreman, would you like to try first?
Well, I don't know. I never thought about this kind of responsibility for scientists, but I think that artists should be free to express his thoughts, opinions, feelings, emotions absolutely freely. And let me tell you, we are talking, sometimes I have a feeling, listening to this gentleman, that we are in a danger that 99% of the filmmakers and artists are totally irresponsible people trying to whitewash and brainwash the audience. I think the opposite is the truth. I think that 99% of people in literature and film and theater are very responsible people and are doing a wonderful job, And of course, you will never have 100%.
There is a distinction here between the question. The question, as I understood it, asked about what the responsibility should be as an internal responsibility, and the answer was an answer in terms of freedom that was about external constraints. There remains a very interesting and important issue. If we say that there is and should and must be freedom to do it, there then remains the question of whether you ought to. An intriguing example, I talked a few minutes ago about Robert Paul Cohen, Cohen versus California, fuck the draft. When the decision in that case was reported in the New York Times the next morning, the New York Times didn't say fuck the draft, even though Cohen said fuck the draft and Mr. Justice Harlan for the Supreme Court said fuck the draft. The New York Times said asterisk, 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 asterisk the draft. Was the New York Times wrong to self-censor itself in that way? Maybe.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And let me just say briefly.
Not. Absolutely not. No.
If I can answer your question briefly.
No.
As a writer, I have never thought it was my job to protect people. I have always thought it was my job to provoke people and to expose them to my most irritating opinions.
Okay, I'm just looking at my wristwatch here, which says something close to 9:15, which is generally go to bed time. But let's go on for another 5 minutes, if it's okay with you guys. And we'll take 2 questions or so, and let's try to keep the questions brief and the answers brief, please.
Okay. My name is Trish Calamari, and I'm a political science student. This question is for Mr. Foreman. Do you feel that you're successful in making the American public reevaluate the First Amendment? And just as far as, you made the point in the movie with when Flint or Harrelson said, if it can protect a scumbag like me, it could work for you guys.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not up to me to answer. You should answer this question.
Well, let's answer that question. What do you all feel? Do you feel that the movie succeeded, in fact, in validating the question, in answering the question in the affirmative? Most of you saw it, right? Okay. There you go. That's good. Yes, please.
I'm George Findeisen. I come from a country where Hitler came to power, financed by a press who take big resort to its freedom of speech.
What country are you from, please?
Germany.
I see.
My question is, can I be proud of that Germany just succeeded in jailing Gary Locke from the United States, who sent his stickers to Germany, to East Germany, where I found them in some streetcars, which with very provocative slogans like kill the foreigners, or with swastikas and so on, which helped really to make, for foreigners, for refugees, a very, very hard time.
And your question?
Well, am I right when I'm still proud of it, that we jailed Gary Locke, and that we have certain restrictions on free speech?
Thank you.
Still.
Germany is not unusual in this regard. The U.S. is unusual. The 1965 Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination requires signatory nations to have laws prohibiting the incitement to racial hatred, requires them to have laws of just the kind that you were talking about. The U.S. has refused to sign that particular provision of this international human rights treaty precisely because on this issue, it's the U.S. that's aberrational. It's very difficult to talk about particular countries in this context because especially on this issue, there is, to use an used word, context, history, and the like. I think it would be dramatically oversimplified to say that the American approach on questions of free speech for Nazis and others is easily exportable.
Okay. This may be the, well, no. Two more questions. Go ahead, please.
My name's Jason. I'm a junior at the college. It strikes me that surrounding the Larry Flynt case, a lot of things happened, a lot of things were believed. People said things, people felt things, and it's our job afterwards to sort of inspire the future by telling a story about what had happened. And I wonder if the panelists and Mr. Foreman would agree that many of your differences are simply a result of a different philosophy of how we tell that story and what the truth of that story is contained in, whether it's in the meticulous details and the power of law and history, or whether it's in, as he says, the spirit of the facts.
Okay. When do you talk about spirit?
I'm not sure I understand.
I'm not sure I understand.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
As I understand the question, it has to do with the way in which you would approach the telling of a story. Do you really need full historical data validation? Can you do it by way of a movie in order to make the larger historical point?
I don't think you need full historical data. I think you can do it metaphorically to make the point. This is a movie, not a biography or a history book, and I think that people understand that. And I think the quarrel that I have with Mr. Foreman is whether he did capture what I think is the spirit of Larry Flynt, and I don't think that's a function of how many historical facts that he used.
Last question, Barbara.
Hi, my name is Barbara Mack, and I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. I just wanted to say that I found Mighty Aphrodite much more offensive than this film might be. Talk about portrayals of unreal situation. But my question is, I'm interested in how you worked with the actors to bring out some of the more subtle aspects of the demagoguery, because I'm interested in the split of what you see as a demagogue as opposed to what Americans see or miss in that, especially the comment you made about the charm of the demagogue.
Well, it seems to me there are two different questions, there is not really a manual how to do these things. It's always usually a result of the collaboration between the script, the actor, and the director. They have to somehow meet and hit the common spine, which is hidden, which if you try to touch it, you have to break, the spinal cord. You have to break the spine, and then you damage the thing. It's difficult to describe. Woody Harrelson spent a lot of time with Larry Flynt trying to get his mannerisms, to get the surface of Larry Flynt. His mental work is on the inside of Larry Flynt. I am just there to judge it as one objective eye and to press it this way or that way, what I think is right and what I believe. For me, the most important thing is, regardless if it's a science fiction film or this kind of a film or a comedy or a tragedy, what I see on the screen, do I believe it or do I not? If I do not believe it, then something is wrong for me and we have to work on it until I can say, yes, I believe it. And I must tell you, my admiration for all three main protagonists is enormous. I just believe every word Woody, Courtney, and Edward Norton say in their parts in the film.
Mr. Foreman, I want to, first of all, thank Fred Schauer and Wendy Kaminer for being with us and discussing your movie today. I'm the only one up here who hasn't seen the movie. I intend to do that. And I think that I can say with relative objectivity that we have explored some of the important issues and you have certainly raised profoundly important questions regarding the value and centrality of freedom and a free press in order to sustain freedom. So if you've done it with this movie, God bless you, and if you failed, do it again, because anyone who did Amadeus can do no wrong. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you.
I apologize if I whatever said, sometimes I don't know what I'm saying.
This is what we do here. We argue with each other.
Thank you. That was